Hello, everybody. Happy Thursday. Of course, Norwich City return to Championship action this Saturday. Watford, the visitors at Carrow Road. Looking forward to it. Of course, Norwich hoping to try and retain their positive home form, of course, off the back of maybe the disappointment last weekend in South Wales. Adam Harvey, joined by Samuel Seaman for your preview show. Lots of stuff to get into this week. Of course, we've had the departure of Narsas Pelash, Paul Clements, etc., etc. So there's lots to talk about. We want your comments, questions, score prediction, whatever it might be, get them down in the comment sections below, and we will come around to those as we work through the show. I mean, Sam, first and foremost, let's start with just last week very briefly. I mean, frustrating afternoon really for Norwich. You know, they had opportunities on another day, probably could have at least got something from the game, maybe even won it. You know, you look at those opportunities late on, Borja signs, you know, a few sort of pretty clear-cut opportunities on another day he definitely takes. Frustrating afternoon for you. I mean, Torrop kind of spoke about that, you know, until maybe the 84th minute in the second half particularly, they didn't really create that much.
Yeah, I think the ending to the game probably flattered them somewhat because they didn't really create much from sort of the 5th or 6th minute all the way through to probably the 80th, and then had a flurry of maybe 3 or 4 chances in those last few minutes that, well, probably, as you mentioned, Sainz should have taken one of them. And actually, I think the way that they ended the game, probably narrative-wise, was a bit helpful for Norwich. It didn't make it feel like quite the same sort of bleak and barren performance that it was for such a long period of that game. But overall, the reflection that I take from that whole situation really was that Norwich are in a transitional season, and I know that everyone felt after Coventry that things had clicked and almost that there might be this process now of Norwich just kicking on and enjoying the benefits of that and reproducing that performance on a regular basis and maybe even going and competing for promotion. But I think this is what we're going to see. I think this is what a transitional team is. They've got a new head coach. They've got new principles. The players are still getting to grips with that. And in football, as in a lot of life, the last thing to come is consistency. You know, you've got really good players here who have played in possession-based systems before, and they're capable of learning to play this football. But in the early stages, finding that on a regular basis is the hardest thing to do. And I think that mapped out to me and probably a lot of Norwich fans how this season might look. It might be a couple of bad performances, some average ones, some really good ones, panning out over the space of a few weeks. And I don't think it was necessarily worse than we might have expected at times this season. We went into it saying there will be some tough afternoons for Norwich. There will be some less entertaining ones probably for fans. And I think that was just one of those that maybe we're expecting to see a few times from Norwich this season. So not an excellent performance, not a very good result, but probably not the end of the world when you look at the wider context as well.
Yeah, Dan saying that game reminded me of the 17-18 season. Was Madders if it wasn't sort of performing to the levels, wasn't scoring those games, it was frustrating. I mean, we saw that quite sort of regularly throughout that season. You know, there was lots of really high moments. Maybe, you know, you look at sort of the Aston Villa home game and various other games, Ipswich away. You know, Madders picking up sort of that moment of special. You know, pick out a goal from anywhere. Finlay saying it's the press conference tomorrow. Yes, that's why we're doing this a day earlier. Obviously, I think the players have got a day off today, haven't they, Sam? So that's why Torrop likes to sort of change between a Thursday and a Friday, particularly on clean weeks. I think the sort of press conferences tend to be Friday rather than a Thursday. Sam, obviously the big news that dropped this week, maybe sort of off the pitch, that will obviously have a little bit of an impact on those in that playing dressing room. Here he is, Narsas Pelash, announced as Stoke City's new head coach. I mean, at the start of the week, you know, Stoke had Stephen Schumacher in charge. They got rid of him on Monday morning very early on, and it was quite evident from sort of lunchtime onwards that Narsas Pelash was sort of a target of Jonathan Walters, the sporting director there, to replace him. Obviously, we've had him on our channels previously. He spoke kind of about his desire and willingness to try and become a head coach in the future. You know, obviously the opportunity at Norwich doesn't feel like it's going to come up anytime soon, particularly obviously with Torrop, you know, arriving relatively recently. What was sort of your reaction, I suppose, to that, Sam? Because, you know, it's one of those that probably came out of the blue a little bit, maybe was a bit unexpected. Disappointment, frustrated, you know, how do you sort of view that?
I think it could be a bigger blow than maybe some people realise, because you speak to anyone in the game about Narcis Pelash, even Paul Clements, who obviously went with him as goalkeeper coach as well. And they say that actually they are among the very best staff that you can get in this league. I spoke to Lee Bromby, who worked with both of them at Huddersfield when he was their head of football operations, and he said that Clements was the best coach he's ever worked with, the best goalkeeping coach in the country, he actually said. And Pelash is thought about similarly highly. I mean, you mentioned that interview with us early last season, and I think everyone got the impression that this was somebody who not only had the right ideas but could communicate them really well as well. And I think most people who come across Pelash, who see him speak, who speak to anyone who knows him or has worked with him, will know that this is a pretty good coach and a pretty good character to have around the dressing room, around the players, and around the training ground, because he really is focused on improving players, on working with individuals. He's very well liked by players as well. And I think he will be quite a significant loss for Norwich. I mean, you don't go from being a first team coach at Norwich to being the head coach at Stoke if people don't really think that you are a massive asset. So I think that will be a little bit of a blow to Norwich, but equally it gives them the opportunity, as I think Ben Napper said in the club's official statement on Pelash and Clements and Harrison Glue leaving, that this opens a vacancy to bring in somebody who maybe is more of the mould that Torop would like in his backroom staff. It means a quicker transition to this new era. And although I think Pelash was actually quite well suited to this Torop style of play, and he'd worked with a similarly possession-based style at multiple clubs in Spain, I think he will still want somebody who he can sort of relate to, who was brought in under this current sporting director head coach combo. And the positive from it is, of course, that, as I said, it gives them the opportunity to move the dial and to quicken the pace of this sort of transitional period. But again, as I said about Swansea, these are the sorts of things that maybe we talked about expecting at the start of the season, that fans were probably expecting when they knew that this was going to be a position of or a period of transition. And I think things like this were always going to pan out across the season. Maybe I wasn't expecting Pelash to be Stoke's first choice when hours earlier we heard that Stephen Schumacher had been dismissed as their head coach. But I think it makes sense. I think it gives Norwich the opportunity to turn the dial. As I said, they need to get this appointment right and these appointments right, because, as I said, they have lost some good coaches in there. But equally, when it comes to identity and the new era and the new project, I think it can be seen as a positive as well.
Yeah, you mentioned the positives there. I mean, there's lots of sort of comments and questions around it flooding through, which we will come around to very shortly. But do you think this is a disruption for the players this week? I mean, obviously, mentioned kind of Pelash being a really liked figure in the dressing room. He's done some good work. He's sort of been that. Him and Clements have kind of been that bridge a little bit between last season and this season, of course, with new management. Even Glenn Riddlersholm completely new to the dressing room. It's an opportunity for those sort of individuals, those coaches, to have sort of helped that transition for the the new two arriving, and probably we've sort of seen glimpses of that, I suppose, of getting to sort of know the players and sort of the systems and everything and how they work, how they operate. Is it almost maybe good timing that it's happened, sort of now rather than right at the start of the season, where they maybe would have had to have brought in a couple of completely new individuals? Sort of how do you sort of see the timings of this situation?
I actually think, in a sense, it's worked against Norwich. Maybe not in the long term. I think you look at the course of the whole season and when Norwich are expected to be at their peak and competing for promotion to the Premier League again. Ultimately, the difference between summer and now isn't that much. And Norwich have had somebody to bridge that gap a little bit, and a couple of people who have spanned both eras. So in the long term, I don't see it being much of a problem. But in the short term, looking at Watford this weekend, the fact that obviously training this week will have felt very different to the players in terms of the faces that they were interacting with, probably some of the change around that there was last minute to some of those schedules. And I think actually going into this weekend's game, that was another thing that Bromby said. He's obviously been a player and been a coach as well as a head of football operations. He's been in a lot of environments where these coaching changes have taken place. And that was another thing that he said, that he felt it could impact Norwich and it could impact those players going into this weekend's game. So I think in the short term, not ideal at all going into Watford. And for once, it's not the Hornets who are in a period of change and having to adapt to things. And it's actually Norwich doing that going into this game. But in the long term, I think there are, some positives as you outlined. And also when you look at the time span that it's going to take for Norwich to get to where they want to be, a couple of months is sort of neither here nor there. I think that whoever comes in maybe would have liked to have a little bit more time to bed themselves in and to get used to things before they were in the thick of the championship action. But I'm sure everyone in football, pretty much, who's worked in football before, has been in these sorts of difficult situations where you have to adapt quickly. And Norwich will be trying to get somebody who can do that, because they are important appointments. And they will be desperate to get them right. But no, on the timing, I think in the short term, it maybe is a little bit of a worry for Norwich, and definitely not a plus going into that game this weekend.
Yeah, there's a few comments around it, which we'll just dig into. Finley saying, any update on the job search? I see that they've put a job application up on Training Ground Guru. I think that's the performance analyst role that's gone up on there. Obviously, Ben Napper speaking sort of more about the Pelash situation. I mean, the quote is, we've already progressed with some of our plans for new additions to our first team backroom staff, and this presents an exciting opportunity for us to continue to evolve things. Now that deal is officially complete, obviously that's the Pelash one, we'll finalise the process with external candidates and make an announcement in the near future. I mean, Sam, sort of any inclination on where Norwich are in that journey? I mean, that probably seems like, they've obviously got candidates identified, and probably a solution will be fairly soon, found.
Yeah, exactly. I'd agree with that. And I think from the quotes that you read out, when you consider how cautious the club will want to be, they won't want to promise anything that they can't deliver. I would take from that Norwich will be fairly advanced in those discussions. Of course, as we saw with the signings of players in the summer as well, they're always doing contingency plans. They've always got lists of people who they'd be interested in. And yeah, I think they've already moved on to targets, already started discussions with clubs about clubs and people who they might want to bring in. And yeah, I think they'll want to do that as quickly as possible, and it probably won't be too long of a wait for them to conclude that search.
Yeah, a few people asking around compensation. Sorry, it's already been answered. I've just joined, but do we know how much Norwich have received in compensation from Stoke? They definitely have received compensation. I mean, I'm not sure the figures are out there, Sam, at the moment.
No, I'm not sure of the figures, but as you say, definitely some compensation in there. And you'd think, given all the positives that we've spoken about around Pelash and also the staff who have gone with him, you can expect that Norwich would have tried to drive a hard bargain and got a decent price, because as far as coaching staff go, they are very highly rated, and they won't want to have lost them on the cheap.
Yeah, Finley. I was hoping maybe that Alex Tetty could be returning. I think he's doing quite good things over there in the Scandinavian region. Dan Mayhew saying, good to see Declan Rudd back. Wonder if we can get John Ruddy back as a goalkeeping coach. Would be great to grow gun command of the area. His weakest area, I suppose, is sort of Dan Mayhew's opinion on that. Wacky on YouTube saying, if Pelash was so good, why didn't Napa think about appointing him instead of Torup? I mean, he obviously spoke quite glowingly about his sort of desire, I suppose, to try and become a head coach. I mean, is that one that maybe, you look back in the future, I suppose, and regret that Norwich didn't give him an opportunity? But then again, Napa's obviously been in the building for 6 months and sort of assessed the situation, targeted Torup as his man. Where do you sort of stand on that one, Sam?
Yeah, a lot probably depends on how well he gets on at Stoke. If he goes and gets them promoted this season, then I'm sure there will be an extra level of maybe regret and drama to those discussions. But I can see why Napa didn't want to do it. I think, it's easy for us to say now, and it's easy for us to look at it and say Pelash is highly rated in the game. Stoke think he's good enough to be a head coach. But if we sort of go back 3 or 4 months, and David Wagner, amid all of the controversy and the disappointment around his playing style and the direction that the club was headed in, if David Wagner gets sacked and then Ben Napper immediately goes and appoints his first team coach, I'm not sure there would have been much of a positive reception to that. And no, I think Pelash probably was deserving of a bit of consideration. And I think we all thought that from what we heard about him within the game, some of the things that he impacted in that team that you could see on the pitch, the way that he spoke especially, I thought was really encouraging. So, yeah, I'm sure that is an option that might not have gone terribly for Norwich, but ultimately Napa came in, wanted to impact things in terms of his own style. And it wasn't just about style of play or improving players. It was about the philosophy, the ability to work in that sporting director model, which admittedly Pelash probably does have, but also it was about developing young players and a track record of doing that. Torup is somebody who came from a club that was famous really for developing young players and also having worked with academy teams and young players for a really, really long time earlier on in his coaching career. So yes, there are credentials in Pelash that I think actually would have suited this Norwich role. But number one, for the feeling of change and a new direction, I don't think that would have been the right move. And number two, Torup has a lot of the strengths that Napa was looking for that maybe aren't quite as embedded in Pelash's CV. So I can see why Napa didn't make that decision, but equally I can see why Norwich fans are maybe looking at that and wondering, could that have been a possibility? And I suppose those discussions may well ramp up if he goes and makes a huge success of himself.
Yeah, Finney's saying no more Webber men. I suppose I was sort of thinking about this last night. It feels like a lot of that sort of Huddersfield regime have moved on. Andy Hughes, John Iger, Webber, now Pelash, etc., etc. Even some of the scouting team that were sort of that Huddersfield core of individuals. Obviously, David Wagner, lots of ex Huddersfield connections are moving on. It does feel like a Norwich, team and a unit moving in a completely different direction away from that. Just moving away from, I suppose, from sort of that off the pitch stuff back to on the pitch stuff. Just want to get your sort of thoughts on Borja's signs this season so far, Sam, because there's a lot of maybe criticism for him after the game at Swansea. There's opportunities that he missed, and I felt at times he's maybe been a little bit greedy, sort of trying to hang on to the ball at different points where there was individuals in better positions. And we all know how exciting he is as a player. He can produce that bit of magic from anywhere at any moment. Some of the moments last season he produced, the Coventry winner sticks out to me as a pretty big moment. Just an electric player that gets you off your seats. But by the same token, I think that frustration that I have with him was probably highlighted on Saturday afternoon. What have you sort of made of his start to the campaign so far under new management?
The inconsistency is the main worry for me, and we were all speaking about him as this player who maybe could catch light a little bit this season, could have that first season of adapting to English football, of looking pretty good but not quite the finished product, and then going and kicking on. We saw it with Gabriel Sara, I think 7 goals and 4 assists in his first campaign at Norwich, and then went and got sort of into the 30s for goal contributions before that £20 million plus move to Galatasaray. So I think a few people were looking at him as somebody who could go and do that. But the difference between some of those magical moments he produced on a fairly rare basis last season and then becoming that player, it is consistency. And although we've already seen a couple of goals from him this season, we've seen him pop up with a winner again against Coventry this season. They must be sick of the sight of him. I think we still haven't seen that consistency. We still haven't seen that quality every single game. And even though I actually thought Sainz was pretty impressive in maybe the first half an hour against Swansea, was the only Norwich player really who looked like creating danger and gaining territory and driving forward for them, he then wasn't consistent for the next 60 minutes and his decisions weren't the best. He obviously didn't come close to converting any of those chances. And actually, neither of those times he got through on goal did he really look convinced himself that he was going to score. So I think maybe confidence is part of it. I'm interested to see how he reacts to that game if he plays against Watford, which I'm sure he probably will. But as I said, consistency is what it's all about for him, and we still haven't seen that this season. So hopefully, in the next few games, he can prove that he can be that consistent player, that he can be that key star player that a lot of Norwich fans felt he could be going into the season. But right now, I think we're almost seeing more of the same last season. Which, don't get me wrong, he's a good player, and for me, is somebody who should be starting week in, week out for Norwich, but he's not somebody you can bank on to perform for you week in, week out. And at this stage of their transition, at this stage of everything changing, I think Norwich need a few more players who they can rely on every single week to perform. And I don't think Sainz currently is one of those. But as much of a cliche as it is, I think getting in those positions is actually harder than finishing those chances. Most professional footballers, to be honest, should be able to finish the chances that Sainz got. So I think if he can get that confidence back in his game, if he can improve his consistency a little bit, he is still, for me, despite that frustrating performance, very close to going on and being a very good player at this level. But yeah, he's just got a couple of things to work on to get there.
Yeah, Wacky saying, is it fair to suggest that if Norwich lost Sainz for any length of time, it could be reminiscent of periods under Daniel Farke where Emmy got injured / banned and we couldn't buy a win, creatively thin squad? And Jeffman sort of saying, is it Sainz putting too much pressure on himself, the creative losses of Rowe and Zari, lots of goals there and assists that have been taken out of Norwich's starting 11. Is that maybe impacting this kind of, I suppose, him maybe not quite hitting the levels at the moment?
It's hard to say without speaking to him and knowing the psychology of him as a person, because we haven't actually seen him in this position before. Last season, it was almost nothing to lose and everything to gain. He arrived on a free transfer. He'd never played in England before. So if it didn't go very well, you could hardly place the failure of a season and blame it all on him. So he is actually in a bit of a new position in terms of that expectation and that need for him to be a force. So I wonder if that is a bit of a consideration for him. But equally, as I said, we're only 5 games into the season, and without being inside his brain or being his psychologist, it's quite hard to say whether that is a factor. But I think it would be fairly normal for it to be, and it would be fairly understandable. You just hope that before long he manages to work that out and iron that out, because as I said, unfortunately, even if it is weighing on him and adding a bit of pressure to him, Norwich do need that player right now, and it doesn't feel like, aside from Josh Sargent, they have many who can really light up a game by themselves.
Yeah, I'm intrigued to get your thoughts maybe on any changes that you could see. Obviously, you're going to have Tactics Board out tomorrow morning where you'll maybe elaborate a little bit more on some of the decision making, but obviously a lot maybe depends on injury situations. I mean, Jeffman's sort of asking here about Slimani, weird player who's only played 45 minutes, but seems already to become quite an important player. That sort of physicality that I felt they really desperately missed at Swansea in the midfield. Opportunities where maybe Swansea started to get hold of the ball. I just think that sort of player that could try and go and, industrial type, maybe that could go and break that up. They sort of lacked that. And he feels like a key player. Let's hope, obviously, there's positive news on him tomorrow. I also saw a comment here from the Dubai Canary. I know you wrote a piece on this week, Sam. Is Onel a starter? Has he carved out a role as a high impact sub? What changes do you see Torp potentially making on Saturday lunchtime?
Yes, a good question. The Slimani one, I think undoubtedly, if he's fit, he will be in that 11. You look at Watford and some of their strengths, physicality and pace are some of their real key strengths that they've had for a while, and some of their best players, especially in that midfield area, actually do give them a bit of that drive. And I'm sure Slimani would be highly valued for Norwich in that sense, but also you look at his injury. I didn't feel it was an especially positive bulletin from Torup after Swansea, and although he did say it might be possible that he's involved for this one, I get the sense Watford might be just a little bit of a push, especially to start and to play a really key, really physical role for a significant portion of the game. So I agree that he would be massive and he would be a really big part of this game. But if right now I had to guess, I'd say maybe it's unlikely that he starts. The Hernandez one is a really interesting discussion. Probably not the most well-received piece that I've ever written, if you look across social media. And it wasn't one where I was necessarily saying he definitely needs to be starting. And I don't think necessarily he has shown that yet. But equally, you do get this sense that because he's a fan favourite and because a lot of people like him for a tattoo and a chant and for loving Argos and the relationship that he has with fans, you do tend to get some who have already completely written him off, and anything good that he does is just dismissed. And I felt actually against Swansea, even though he wasn't on the pitch for very long, he really did change the dynamic, and he really did change the way that the game was not going for Norwich, gave them a bit more thrust and a bit more activity. But although I think it is close, and I think that he is actually pushing himself into the conversation with some of those performances. I do probably just about fall on the side that he is better from the bench and he is better against tired legs, and maybe that his role in this system, or there isn't much of a role for him to start in this system, and that would be actually my kind of major concern, would be where do you fit him in? Because for me, the only direct replacement, and if people want a bit of a longer discussion on what some of the options are, then I'd recommend watching the podcast or reading that piece. But the only direct way that he gets in the team is instead of Borja Sainz, and because of the strengths that I spoke about and we spoke about earlier on, I don't really see that being a viable or a good swap for Norwich to make. So right now, I probably wouldn't have him in the starting 11, but equally, I think there needs to be competition. There needs to be a recognition that he could be a starting option, and he needs to keep pushing, because he has been very good in a lot of performances this season, and that is good to see.
Yeah, I think Finley was mentioning Cade Gordon as well, of course, having a week now in training. I think, I saw some footage on the club's channels this morning, and he looks fairly sharp from a sort of very small sample of moments that we saw, but intrigued to see what we get with him. I mean, Kevin just mentioning Cernach as well. I mean, what have you sort of made of him? I mean, I felt he was a little bit more positive actually when he came off the bench against Swansea after what was, of course, a difficult afternoon for him at Coventry.
Yeah, I thought it was a decent 7 out of 10 substitute appearance from Cernach at Swansea, and it definitely is a position where you still feel he could be the first in line, and he could still just about be the first choice overall. Obviously, Torrent went for Oscar Schwartau in that position at Swansea, but I feel that Cernach does look a lot more of a natural, if not a traditional winger, then a wide option, and somebody who can contribute by cutting in on his left foot. He does look like he's got a decent strike on him, as anyone who saw some of his goals last season will know. And he does have that technique to try and create things and try and add a bit of quality in the final third. But it hasn't worked out for him yet, technically, as well as just the sort of physical and tactical adaptations that you have to make when you join a new club. He has struggled, and that's been the main concern for me, is that if you aren't making the sorts of passes that you should be making, if your touch doesn't look great, then where does that come from? Because that isn't coming from adapting to the league or being in a different circumstance. It might have come in the first couple of weeks, to be fair, from a lack of sleep or a tired body from travel. But I think at this point, he needs to be showing some of that quality that Norwich paid a very decent sum of money for. But it does feel to me right now that in Torup's mind, he is still probably just about top of the pecking order, and he does have a decent chance at nailing down that right wing position, which feels up for grabs. I mean, there's been some discussion about, some of the other options. Obviously, we've talked about Ono Hernandez, Cade Gordon in the comments as well. So it's definitely not going to be easy for Cernach, and he does have to be wary of that competition. But I'd say that right now, looking at the broader picture, it is almost his shirt to lose at the moment.
Yeah, we'll turn the attention forward to the opposition. Of course, Watford had a pretty positive start to the campaign. I mean, they've dipped a little bit in recent games, a defeat against Sheffield United, but we saw that at Carrow Road, the quality that they've still got running through their team. A draw at home to Coventry, but prior to that, they'd beaten Stoke quite convincingly, beat Derby, beat Millwall, a couple of wins in the Carabao Cup. I think there's maybe a feeling of a little bit more stability in the Watford camp at the moment. Tom Cleverley, of course, been in and around Watford for quite a few years now, and obviously a player now being brought in as sort of their head coach, and I think the fans are sort of buying into him. The communication's been a little bit better. We know the sort of circus that Watford's been at different points in terms of managerial merry-go-round. But yeah, I think that there feels to be a slightly more positive feeling in sort of the Hornets camp. I mean, what have you made of their start to the season, Sam? It feels from afar that they've sort of maybe switched a little bit compared to last season, where it was a mid-table finish and a lot of frustration.
Yeah, I'm actually a little bit surprised, to be honest, because you look at the stagnation that there's been from those players at times in the last couple of years, the way that the team's looked. They've now got a manager who doesn't have any experience at all in the first team environment. They didn't finish the season especially well under Tom Cleverley either. And you actually looked at it in pre-season as maybe, could they be one of these teams that people don't really think about, and actually they struggle and they find themselves in trouble? But it's gone completely the opposite way. And not only has it been convincing in terms of their results, it's also been convincing in terms of their performances. And it probably shows you that although at Norwich there's this big rebuild going on and this new project, and after a couple of years of trying to do small tweaks, Norwich have turned to that. It does show you that actually in different environments, sometimes small tweaks do work, and sometimes little bits of business and small changes. I mean, for Watford, changing the manager is quite a small change, given how regularly it happens. Those small tweaks can actually benefit some clubs, and it looks like that's what's happened to Watford. But there are a lot of teams who go on and kick on at the start of the season and look really, really good. I think Reading did it one season and were looking like they were in the automatic promotion race, and then ended up getting relegated. The Championship is a good one for a couple of teams to soar at the start and then track downwards. But I'd say the signs so far look pretty good. I'd say some of their strengths are actually the ones that will test Norwich quite significantly. They've got good pace going in behind. They've got strength in the midfield. They're a bit more of a physical side that probably has more of the ability to test some of Norwich's weaknesses physically in terms of pressing and tactically as well. I think Watford will fancy their chances in this one, but equally, Norwich will hope to expose some weaknesses. As I said, they've looked like a team that maybe has been vulnerable in the last few years, and I'm not sure all those vulnerabilities go away in a few weeks. So it will be a really interesting game. We know what an excellent record Watford have against Norwich, and they'll feel, I think, after the start to the season they've had, pretty confident that they can go and extend that good record.
Yeah, lots of sort of. I suppose I was intrigued to ask you a little bit about the Carrow Road factor. There's a few comments here as well that are sort of in and around that. In the Watford fan here on YouTube saying Norwich unbeaten in 20 home games. Jeffman saying if things don't go to plan on Saturday, we'll be interested to see how the fans react in the ground. General reaction on Twitter after games was concerning, particularly after that Swansea one. Maybe we need to give Johannes Torp time. I mean, that Carrow Road factor, Sam, they're unbeaten there since early November. That pretty grim defeat against Blackburn, but ever since then, the mood's not been great at different points. You look at last season, the Watford home game is ironically sort of quite a defining moment in that. They won that game 4-2, but it felt like Norwich were sort of being beaten all over the pitch, from their sort of, I suppose, reaction to the substitutions that night and Wagner sort of coming out and sort of slamming the fans after the game. But there feels like a sort of fresh optimism I felt a little bit of Carrow this season, even, the two draws there against Blackburn and against Sheffield United. I think the positive on the front, football that Norwich are trying to play, the fact they tried to win both of those games late on, it feels like, that home form and that home sort of fortress feel around Carrow Road is a little bit different this season.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's important that this game has come at this time for Norwich. It was actually a theme that came out in our spaces on X after the Swansea game, was that actually the fact that Norwich now return to Carrow Road and they have that home game after that disappointing kind of typical tough Championship away loss. I think it's really important that they've now got to go back to Carrow Road, as the Watford fan mentioned, unbeaten there in 20 games, a really good record that not only spans the Torp era and this season, but previous eras. And I think that gives them a lot of confidence when you think there are quite a lot of factors going against them. They don't really have much momentum. They're trying to work out where it went wrong against Swansea. They're playing a team who are in really good form and will have a lot of confidence. But so many of those players will just have the muscle memory of walking out at Carrow Road in the last year or so and just getting fantastic results, putting in very, very good performances. And I think that does give Norwich a massive boost. If you look at maybe the fixture list and how that's fallen for Norwich, if the Swansea game and Coventry game were swapped around, I think the chances of them getting the same result against Coventry would be very low. But the fact that now after this Swansea loss, they're playing at home again, I think it's not quite the same as if they had another long away trip and they had another spell away from their fans. And actually, after I think 4 weeks away from Carrow Road, I'm sure a lot of those players and certainly almost all of those fans will be very pleased to be back there. So yeah, I think it is a factor going in Norwich's favour. They probably needed a couple of factors going in their favour when you consider some of the things that are going against them. And I do think that levels it up a little bit and probably gives Norwich a bit of confidence where maybe there are a few factors that suggest they shouldn't have quite as much.
Yeah, Jeff and saying, any idea on the longest unbeaten run at home? I don't know, Sam, you've done a piece kind of around Carrow Road. Is that something
I think this is what it is. I think this is the longest unbeaten run at home ever. That was definitely the rumor going around the press lounge before that Sheffield United game, was that if they managed to get a draw from that, it would be the longest one, and obviously they did. So I'm assuming our media colleagues weren't incorrect, and that actually it is. So well, that tells you how rare this run is and how big it is for Norwich to keep it going.
Yeah, we'll have to do a little bit of digging to double sort of fact check that. But yeah, that is sort of the inclination. Before I get your score prediction, Sam's going to dip into a few more of these comments. Barnes, Sorensen and Fashnak latest. I mean, last week, obviously, Torp did kind of give a little bit of an update on those. They all feel a little bit of a way off. I know you mentioned Sorensen. Was it Sorensen that might be back in training end of this week? So obviously we'll get a little bit more of a sort of fact check on that. Barnes a few weeks away. I think Fashnak's one that's maybe slightly less positive news. Dan Mayhew going for Fisher in for Stacey. Stacey being a bit consistent in the last year. Sort of thoughts on that? I mean, Fisher's been quite impressive in both the sort of cameos he's had in the Cup this year.
Yeah, I think he's been good, but I think that is a little bit harsh on Jack Stacey, actually, because I think this season so far, he does give Norwich something different. I spoke about the thrust and the drive going into the opposition half that Hernandez brings maybe as a substitute. And I actually think Stacey brings that at right back. We all know about Torp's love for an inverted fullback and doing that on the left side most of the time. And also, obviously, most of the system is about possessional play, about systems and movements. Stacey gives you a bit of that individual quality, not in the same sense of maybe a Ball Hyacinth or a Josh Sargent where they're going to beat two players and then fire it in the corner, but he gives you a bit of that athleticism where if you can get the ball out to him, and give him the opportunity to run, he can get you up the pitch and he can almost force things when they're at a bit of a logjam. So I think he gives Norwich something very different. I think Kellen Fisher probably is more well suited to the system, but equally, if you're going to have that right winger cutting in and staying inside, as we've seen from Norwich so far this season, that space out wide is there to be exploited, and I think Stacey does that pretty well. Admittedly, not his best showing against Swansea. Maybe a couple of errors leading up to that goal that he was involved in, and at the other end of the pitch didn't show as much quality as he can. And I think consistency, similar to Sainz, is another element of his game that you'd like to see him improve. But tactically and individually, I think he gives Norwich something that maybe otherwise they don't quite have. And for that reason, I would still keep him in the team, even though I do agree that Kellen Fisher has made some positive strides, and before long it feels that he'll be ready for certainly a fairly decent role in that Norwich team.
Yeah, Tim, a few more. Brandon saying, when's the press conference? 1:30 tomorrow lunchtime is the press conference. So, of course, we'll be there. Have it all covered, all full video on our YouTube channel tomorrow afternoon. Finley saying, any money from Ida last night scoring in the Champions League? I mean, we'd have to fact check that with those that would know. But Norwich obviously did have various add-ons and stuff. I don't know if you would know if that's one, Sam, but I can't imagine scoring in the Champions League is probably a sort of metric that you'd go by.
It's one that I'm going to have to probably go away and dig into. As you said, obviously there will be various clauses, but also worth noting I suppose it's different sporting directors, different eras, so you don't know for sure. But Emi Buendia's Champions League debut, they didn't get anything out of. So I don't know how much of a common thing that is. It's something we'll definitely check, and if it is something that Norwich benefit from, then it's something that we can go and message out. But yeah, good to see him scoring in the Champions League. Hopefully it means an uplift for Norwich, but yeah, something we'll have to go and check first.
A few people fact checking us on the longest run. Finley saying longer than Ken Brown in 86, but don't know any further than that. But then Dan Mayhew's clearly done the digging. The record is 31 in 1972. So they've got 11 more games to match that, 12 more to sort of succumb that and beat that record. So plenty of work for Johannes Hoff-Torp to do in terms of trying to keep hold of that. But as Jeffman said, the Carrow Road sausage rolls must have played a factor in that run. Don't think anyone likes the Carrow Road sausage rolls more than Jeffman, to the point that I probably need to try them to So, we get different ones in the press lounge, which I have to admit are very, very good. So maybe there's some sort of correlation there and something we'll have to.
Yeah, maybe you and Jeffman need to meet in the concourse and swap sausage rolls so that you can try the commercial ones and he can try the media ones, because there definitely is probably interest from both sides by the sounds of it.
Jeffman as well saying here, you lads need more NCFC memorabilia in your room. I mean, I've moved house, to be fair, and my office is currently going under renovation. The wallpaper got stripped off sort of the last couple of weeks. So when that's painted, I do have some nice prints and various things of Norwich City memorabilia that will go back up. So the backdrop will soon be there. I mean, Sam, have you got anything to say for why you don't have more Norwich memorabilia in the background?
I don't know really. When I started the job, I sort of veered away from it. I thought I'm going to go for a nice professional, impartial look, which, to be fair, was tough when I first started, because I was still in my parents' house at the time that had been decorated when I was quite a small child, and I still had a big yellow and green wall. So getting that out of the picture in the first place a couple of years ago was quite hard. But yeah, right now, I don't know. I think maybe I do need a couple more things to add a bit of ambiance to my flat, and maybe I will consider something Norwich City related. But if so, it'll be calm and understated and professional, rather than a big yellow and green wall as I used to have.
There's a question as well here. Should we give the free transfer market a chance? There's lots of talents in there. I mean, I sort of saw, I think, an 11 of available players that are currently free. I mean, is there any areas that Norwich should dip into that market? Feels quite unlikely, between now and January.
Yeah, I think if they were going to do that, then they would have done it before now. I mean, these players have been out of contract, obviously, for a good long while. Most of them. There would have been some of them who had maybe contracts terminated so that they could go and look for moves. But even in that case, it's been sort of 3 weeks since the window closed. So, yeah, I can't see Norwich doing anything with that. I think Torup is happy that he's got a settled squad now to work with until at least January, and I think they will press on as it currently is, rather than probably looking in the free market area.
Norwich City fan club on YouTube saying sort of about the excitement maybe of what could be done this season. Where's the expectation? I mean, we sort of spoken a little bit about this quite a lot, I suppose, on podcasts and various things, that they're almost just sort of it could be anywhere, I suppose. Norwich obviously depends on how quick they gel and how quick the systems get put into play and all these other factors. I mean, Sam, is there really an expectation that can be attached to this season at all?
Not really, I wouldn't say. I mean, I'm sure they would like not to go down to League One. I think Torup, to be fair to him, in a couple of his public appearances upon being appointed, talked about the fact that there would be maybe 15 clubs that wanted to achieve promotion this season, and Norwich would definitely be one of those. But that is quite a large bracket to put yourselves in. He hasn't openly said we must get promoted this season. And if you go back to the chat that we had with or you guys had with Glenn Riddersholm out in Austria, he said that they weren't expected to get promoted until 3 years' time or a couple of seasons from now, that they would be competing for that. So I don't think there is the expectation or the pressure on them to get promoted as quickly as this season. Obviously, as I mentioned, going down to League One would be a real massive blow in both the short and long term. But other than that, I think if there is progress from when Torup arrived to the end of the season, and significant progress, then that will be enough for Norwich, and they will feel that they're headed in the right direction for promotion, which, as Riddersholm said, the expectation is to make that happen in the third season. Yeah,
lots more comments around sausage rolls. We'll quickly delve into those before I get your score predictions. Jeffman saying deal sausage roll smuggler. We'll have to arrange that, Jeffman. Dan Mayhew, we need a sausage roll review on the next podcast. I mean, Sam, they're definitely very good. Me and you both, often venture down to the press room at half time, and actually we do the good work of, the charitable work that we do. We bring them back for Connor and Paddy as well.
Yeah, proper nice guys, us. They would never even get a flavour of the sausage rolls if it weren't for me and you going and doing the diligent work, the embarrassing work where you have to explain that it's not just for you that you're taking these 4 sausage rolls up to the press box. So we're doing very good charitable work. I think me and you getting those sausage rolls up to Paddy and Connor. But yeah, I am a little bit surprised by the level of sausage roll chat. But when you've got Jeffman in the room, that's what tends to happen, I think.
Wacky big statement. Nothing beats the sausage rolls at White Hart Lane. I must confess, I've never tried them.
They are sensational, Adam. You have to go out of your way to try them if you ever get a chance. It's barely a sausage roll. It's like a pie. They're like that big. They are great. Fair play.
There we go. Also, lots of comments about shades and Paddy failing to wear them at Swansea, and of course Norwich lost that day. I mean, I'm going to remind him for that on Saturday. I mean, whether the sun's going to be out, where he's going to need them, I don't know, but it's pretty clear that it's what the people want, to be fair. So he's reticent to wear them, but we're going to have to reinforce the law now that Paddy has to wear the shades until they don't work, and then maybe you can put them away for a few weeks. Sam, I think it's got to that point where we've been going for 45 minutes. It is going to be score prediction time. I mean, there's lots of sort of relative positivity, I guess, in the sort of comments. I have to go back a little bit, but I've seen some positives. 1-0 Norwich win here. Even the Watford fan not feeling overly confident, going for a 3-1 defeat. I think I saw a 1-1 draw from Finley somewhere in our comment section. So mixed feelings. How do you see this game going, Sam? Is it going to be one that 2-0 there from Peter? I mean, look at the records. I don't think there's been a draw between these two sides since 2011. Watford have had typically the upper hand over kind of the last 10 games. I think they've won 8. Norwich have won 2. Obviously, Norwich won the last game at Carrow Road 4-2. So where's your head at? How do you see this game going?
I'm not feeling overly optimistic going into it, to be honest. I just think the Pelash factor, how good Watford have looked so far this season, some of the concerns that maybe there were from the Swansea game, and I don't want to act like it's all doom and gloom. I don't think Norwich are about to go on a sort of losing run or on any sort of disastrous streak of form, but I just think Watford, unfortunately, will have a bit too much for them. So I'm going to say 2-1 to Watford, but the good news is that I said 2-1 to Norwich against Swansea. So hopefully my predictions are just terrible this season, and that's a sign that Norwich may win. But unfortunately, right now I'm not feeling overly optimistic for Norwich. What about you, Adam? You're going to give us a bit more positivity?
Yeah, I've done obviously a podcast with the Watford fans the other night, and they were both feeling relatively confident. I also went on their show, and I went for the same score as what the Dubai Canaries went for, an absolute goal fest that Norwich win 3-2. If you look kind of, I suppose, historically over recent times, there's always goals between these two. The 4-2 last year, the 3-2 where Norwich were 2-0 up at Vicarage Road and crumbled. There was the Josh Sargent 3-0. I think they beat Watford 4-2 on it in the relegation year in the Premier League. I think they're already relegated. And 3-0 at Carrow Road. I think I put the clip up on our X account this morning. So there's always goals between these two, which probably means it's going to be 0-0 and all these records will go out the window. But yeah, I'm going to go for a 3-2 Norwich win. Home form continues, and the positivity around Carrow Road will maintain a 1-0 defeat there from the Canary fan club. Not feeling quite so confident. So yeah, mixed feelings in the comments. Jeffman as well. I'll have to meet you lads after again. Do a fan reaction video. There we go. Sam, of course, will be doing those after the game on Saturday, Jeffman. So maybe try and get yourself involved. And with that, of course, we're going to sign off this lunchtime. As we mentioned, the press conference will be tomorrow, so we'll get all the latest from Johannes Hoff-Torup. Sam's tactics board video will be available tomorrow, so he'll sort of give you some thoughts and feelings on that sort of 11 and how he sees this game going. Terrace Talk is already up. That's sort of more of an insight, I suppose, into the Watford camp and how their season's been going so far. We had the special podcast with Elliot Bennett this week as well, which is quite nice, actually. Talks a lot kind of about maybe how he felt like a little bit of an imposter until that goal at Tottenham. Some really sort of nice words that I really enjoyed that podcast. So anyone that's not given that a look yet, well worth checking out. Of course, we've got the Pink and Plus digital subscriptions as well, which, is good value for money, we feel. And all the content for the upcoming weeks, is all going to be covered across there. We're at every press conference, every game, covering every kick. So, our channels, I suppose, it is the place to go. We've got the WhatsApp channel, which is growing quite significantly in recent times. So if you haven't checked that out, of course, got all the socials as well. So all the plug in there is done. Looking forward to the game on Saturday, as I say, back at Carrow Road, 12:30 kickoff. So anyone that's forgotten that, it's going to be an early start. So let's see what we get. Dan Mayhew's saying that 3-0 was in 21. One of my favourite away games I've ever been to. Yeah, the Josh Sargent scorpion kick. Maybe we see a similar pattern on Saturday. I think Josh Sargent's got a pretty good goal record against Watford. I think it's 4 in 5 appearances. So
maybe he maintains that and Norwich get a vital 3 points. With that, we're going to sign off this Thursday lunchtime. Okay, if you're heading down to the game, of course, enjoy the game, enjoy your weekend, and hopefully the sun's shining and Paddy Davitt's shades will come.